Hello students, this is Mr. Nielsen. I'm going to be posting videos like this going forward, covering different things we're studying, different content, going over notes. This video is going over both part 1 and part 2 of the lunchroom fight activity we were working on before we went to the school at home model that we're doing right now. Part 1 of the lunchroom fight was 3 questions. You should have completed these before you started doing school from home. If not, or if you lost them, you have to redo them. Complete them now. There's a copy of it on Schoology under the assignment named Lunchroom Fight Part 1. Those are due actually today. So have those turned in by 11:59 p.m. this evening. The 3 questions there are: why would there be different stories of the event if no one is just plain lying? What are the different types of people who might have seen this fight? Examples, blah blah blah. What might make one person's story more believable or plausible than another person's? That we're going to be going over in this video today. Part 2 is the context part. It looks at not just the witness statements like part 1, but also looks at what other things might be happening that would make that would change the situation, or that would give witnesses and participants different ideas than they might normally have. That's called context. Okay. So this one, you may have begun this worksheet, you may have even finished it, some of you. Again, if you lost it or if you need a copy, it's on Schoology under Lunchroom Fight Part 2. So finish those for tomorrow and turn them in no later than 11:59 p.m. tomorrow, Thursday, April 16th. If you can't finish Lunchroom Fight Part 1 or Part 2 by today or tomorrow, respectively, still finish them, turn them in late. As you may know, late credit is being given for assignments. So make sure you get everything done and turned in, even if you can't get it done and turned in on the exact day that it's due. So let's go ahead and take a look at Lunchroom Fight Part 1. We're going to review that, and we're going to go through Part 1, which is about witnesses, and we're going to look at those questions. Question 1 is, why would there be different stories of the event if no one is just plain lying? Remember, we went over this one in class, and we came up with a number of different answers. But one thing we came up with is different people see and hear different things. So why might that be? Okay. They saw the fight from different perspectives or angles. So if you're closer to the fight, or if no one is standing in your way, you'll see more than someone who is further away or someone who has a blocked view. If you see the fight from one side of the lunchroom, it'll give you a different view of what happened than someone on the other side of the lunchroom. For example, your view might be blocked and you might not see who pushed first or who threw the first punch. People saw the fight at different times, right? Some people might have only seen the beginning of the fight. Some people may have come in the middle of the fight and only saw the end of it, right? If you see the whole fight from before it started to after it ended, you're obviously going to have a different explanation of what happened than somebody who only saw part of the fight. In terms of hearing, right? If you heard what was said between the students before the fight, you're going to explain how what happened in the fight differently than if you did not hear what was happening. Another thing is, were you paying attention, right? People who were paying attention to what was happening from the beginning are going to have a different explanation than those who only started watching after the fight started. And so if somebody was paying attention, somebody who's right by the 2 students who fought, and was paying attention to what they were doing is going to give a different account of what happened, a different explanation of what happened than somebody who only heard them after they started fighting and then turned and started watching them after the fight already started. Another reason why there would be different stories of the event if no one is just plain lying is that different people know different things, right? People who know more information about either of the students fighting might understand the fight better and explain what happened differently. Okay? So what you know about a situation, especially if you know background information, can change what you see and what you remember about an incident, like a fight. If you know the two students are enemies, then you might understand the fight differently than, say, someone who doesn't know the two students and doesn't know why they're fighting. Okay. Getting into that, people who know about the relationship between the two students fighting might explain what happened differently. Right? If someone doesn't know anything about the two students fighting, they might not recognize something important. For example, if one student bumped into another student, it might just seem like an accident. But if you know those two students don't like each other, you see that and realize the fight really started when student 1 intentionally bumped into student 2, which caused student 2 to get angry and intentionally step on student 1's brand new white Yeezys, which leads them to shoving and punches being thrown, and then a fight happens. Right? So if you know that those two students don't like each other, and you know that student 1 didn't bump into student 2 on accident, and student 2 didn't accidentally try to ruin student 1's brand new white Yeezys, then you know that that's when the fight really started versus someone else who might say, oh, well, it was just all an accident. Right? So, continuing question 1 on why there would be different stories if no one is just plain lying. Different people interpret things differently. Remember, interpret was a word of the day. It's how you explain something or how you understand something. Okay. Students who are friends with one of the students fighting are going to see and explain the fight in a way that makes their friend look more innocent. So two people can see the same thing and yet explain it very differently based on who they are, what they saw, what they know, and even their own life experiences. Right? So if you are friends with one of the students fighting, you're going to see the thing they did as just maybe joking around. Versus if you don't like that student, you're going to say, no, that's not joking around, that's bullying. Right? Another example of this that you see in real life all the time is racism. So you have one person who says something ignorant about race, and then a person of that race says, hey, that's racist. Then person 1 goes, no, that's not, how is that racist? And person 2, they try to explain it, and they say, oh yeah, what you said is racist because, and their explanation makes sense. But because person 1 is a different race and just has never experienced what person 2 is talking about, what person 2 experienced in life, they don't get how what they said was racist. So because they're two different people, they hear the same thing, but they interpret it very differently because of their life experiences. Because one person has had one set of life experiences, they have a background, and another person has a different background, a different set of life experiences. And the same thing happens when students watch a fight, right? Because they have different experiences, they have different backgrounds, they see the same thing, but they interpret it differently based on what they know, who they're friends with, their own experiences, all things like that. Okay. Another thing that has people interpret things differently is if they like one student better, they're going to explain what happened in a way that is better for that student, for the student they like. All right. In that sense, people usually view their friends as good and people who don't like their friends as bad. So when a student sees their friend get in a fight, they're going to believe that their friend is innocent and the victim, and that their friend did not start the fight for no reason. They're going to believe that the other person started the fight because they do not like that person. Right? This again gets into the bullet point above this, when we're talking about how one person sees something as bullying and another person says, no, he's just joking or she's just teasing. That's not bullying, that's teasing. That's different, right? And if you're friends with a person, you might say, oh, that's just my friend, they just tease people. But if you don't like that person, you're going to say, no, that person's a bully. That's bullying, that's not teasing. They're not making jokes, they're being mean, right? And so if you like someone, you're going to interpret what they do as okay, and if you don't like someone, you're going to interpret what they do as wrong. Another thing is people have assumptions about, in this case, the two students fighting, so they're going to have assumptions about the students themselves, the two students who are fighting. They're going to affect how they explain, what they saw in a fight, and this can affect anyone, right? The assumptions people have about others can affect anyone, teachers, the dean, the principal, other students, anyone. So people have opinions of other people, and sometimes they can't imagine, in the case of a fight, a certain student doing something like starting a fight because they believe, they're just not that kind of student. They're just not that kind of kid who would start a fight. All right, so if you have one student who gets in trouble all the time and that student gets in a fight, people are going to say so-and-so definitely started the fight because they get in trouble all the time. That might not be the case, but people assume because this student's a troublemaker, they must have started the fight, right? You could say there's no way student number 2 started the fight. They never get in trouble. They're a good kid. They must have been defending themselves. And since that is what they believe that student 1 is a troublemaker and student 2 is a good kid that never gets in trouble. That is what they see. So what they believe, even if what they see doesn't actually show that, their mind tells them, oh, I believe that student 1 is a troublemaker, and I believe that student 2 is a good kid. Therefore, when I see the fight, I see student 1 being a troublemaker and starting the fight, and I see student 2 being a good kid and just defending themselves, right? And so that changes what they see, and then that is what they remember, even if that might not be the truth. Right? Which gets into the next thing, different people remember things differently. So why might there be different stories of an event? Well, because different people remember things differently. Some people have better memories than other people. Some people remember more details, right? And those details are going to create a different story than somebody who doesn't have as good of a memory for details. So if someone can remember all the details, that's going to change their explanation of what happened. And if someone doesn't remember all the details, they're going to have a different explanation. Okay. Another thing, and it sounds weird, but it's absolutely true. When people hear someone else explain an event or are questioned about an event in a certain way, it changes the way that they remember the event themselves. Right? So we could say that people's memories change based on the memories actually change based on things that happen afterwards. So after a fight, people immediately start talking about the fight, right? You know this. First thing, fight happens, immediately students start talking about it, right? And so if one of the students hears their classmates say, I saw it, student 1 definitely started the fight, they totally shoved into student 2 on purpose. That's the only reason student 2 stepped on student 1's Yeezys, blah, 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 right? You might have seen student 1 bump into student 2, but forgot that that happened because your brain didn't think it was important, right? It's just an accident, right? But then when that student said it, like, oh, the fight started when student 1 bumped into student 2, right? Now you remember that that happened, and your memory of the event changes because you heard that explanation, right? Another way that people's memories change is how when they're asked about a certain event, right? When they're asked questions about it. And an example of this is if you're asked the question, didn't student 1 start the fight, right? Or if you're asked, how did student 1 start the fight? Or why did student 1 throw the first punch? That's going to make you try to remember how student 1 started the fight. Even if student 1 didn't start the fight, okay? If you're asked, how did student 1 start the fight? You're going to try to remember, oh, how did student 1 start the fight? Okay? Your memory might change in order for you to answer the question. On the other hand, if you're asked the question, who started the fight? Now you're just trying to remember who actually started the fight. And so, based on how the question is asked, can even change your memory of what happened. And so we're going to wrap up question 1 there and move on to question number 2 now, right, which is, what are the different types of people who might have seen this fight? And the examples they give, remember, e.g. is short for example. Friends of those involved, people who don't know the kids who were fighting, those who were fighting, teachers, students. So the list that we came up with was friends of the students fighting, other students in the lunchroom staff, other staff members who are in the lunchroom at the time of the fight, say custodians, lunchroom monitors, right? That would be teachers, principal, dean, etc. Yeah, so that's about all I could come up with. That's all I remember us coming up with in class. If you have others, you could add those to the list. This is not, don't erase anything if you have anything on there that's different, unless it's just, absolutely wrong. But that's what I came up with. So now moving on to question number 3. So what might make one person's story more believable or plausible than another person's? Okay, so I'll actually click through this. So plausible is something that makes sense. It is reasonable or probable. So what makes one person's story more believable or reasonable or probable than another person's? So, one thing, they are trustworthy. They do not have a history of lying. Right? 2, they are unbiased. They do not have any reason to lie. Unbiased is treating both sides equally, not favoring one side over the other. They saw the whole fight from close up, not part of the fight, or saw the fight from far away. So if they saw the whole fight, that makes their story more believable or more plausible. They might have something to lose by lying, right? So if a student lies about a fight, they might get detention. If a teacher lies about a fight, they might get fired. Obviously, getting fired is worse than getting detention. So someone who has more to lose by lying is more likely to tell the truth. If what they said in their account makes sense, that's a reason to believe them, right? An account is a true story or a person telling what happened. So whenever you hear me say the word account, know that I am talking about either something that is a true story or when a person tells what happened, right? When someone asks you, hey, what did you do over your weekend? And you tell them about your weekend, That is an account. That is you telling what happened. And then lastly, if a person is able to give details or give evidence to support their account, to support their version of events, that makes their story more believable or more plausible. Right? If, for example, you said that the fight started after student 2 pushed student 1 after student 1 scuffed their Yeezys, and then you can show that, student 2 has a scuff on their Yeezys, that would be evidence. That would support your version of events. Okay, and then, again, going with the definitions, remember that plausible is something that makes sense. It is reasonable or probable. Unbiased is treating both sides equally, not favoring one side over the other. And an account is a true story. It is a person telling what happened. Okay, so in conclusion, why does this all matter? So what? Why are we doing this? Why are we talking about a lunchroom fight in history class? And this gets into a common question about studying and learning about history, which is, how do we actually know what happened in the past? And that's complicated. There's a lot of different things, a lot of different factors that go into how we actually know what happened in the past, but ultimately it comes down to we use accounts written by people who were there, or we use photographs taken by people who were there, or videos taken by people who were there. This is almost always how we figure out what actually happened in the past. There are other things that we can use, right? These are just 3 examples of historical sources. We also use artifacts, right? Those are things that sometimes we dig up out of the ground, or objects, from the past. As another source, there are, in reality, anything from the past can be a source to learn about what happened in the past, depending upon, what you want to learn. But in the end, as historians, we really want to find accounts that are written by people who were there. We want to find photographs of the events. We want to find videos of the events, because those are going to give us the most complete picture of what happened in the past. So how this ties into the lunchroom fight is that's what we're trying to do. Trying to figure out what happened in this fight between 2 students in the lunchroom. And so we need to get accounts, in this case written accounts, by people who were there when the fight happened. And that's how we learn about this fight that happened in the past. The same thing we do when we're studying history. How do we know what happened during the Revolutionary War? How do we know what happened during westward expansion in the United States? How do we know what happened, even in things more recent, like on September 11th, 2001, during, on 9/11, right? We want to find accounts from people who were there. Written accounts, photographs, videos if they're available, and that tells us what happened in the past. And why these questions matter is because in order to really know what happened in the past, we have to answer the same questions we had to figure out about, or that we had to answer in order to figure out what actually happened in the lunchroom fight. All right? We want to know who did what. What did they do? Who were the witnesses? What did the witnesses say? Can we believe the witnesses? How much of what the witnesses said can we actually believe? Right? Getting into this, right? Who saw what? What did they see? How much of what they're saying is believable? What are their reasons for telling the truth? All of that goes into, not just the lunchroom fight, but any time we study history, right? And one of the complicated parts about this, right, is most of the time you cannot take everything someone says as completely 100% true. No one is telling 100% of the truth all of the time. And you also cannot throw out everything someone says as completely 100% false. No one is lying 100% of the time. So you have to gather all the information and then use the information that you have, about who is giving the accounts, right? We have to look at their backgrounds, look at their reasons for telling the truth, look at their reasons for telling part of the truth, look at their reasons for lying. And then we have to look at what they actually said, what information is in their account, and then we determine how much we actually believe that person. What part of their account is true? What part of their account is false? What part of their account is partially true and partially false? And it gets really complicated. And it's a very difficult process, but if we want to know what actually happened, if we want to know the truth about something that happened in the past, we have to take into consideration all of these things. And like I said again, this goes for if we're trying to figure out what happened in a fight in the lunchroom, or if we're trying to figure out what happened during the Revolutionary War, which we'll take a look at as an example right now. All right. So, if we look at the Revolutionary War, we can read accounts written by different people who fought in or lived during the Revolutionary War. And if you remember, which you should, this was the war between Great Britain and the United States, which ended with the United States winning and becoming independent. Okay? So, if we read accounts from the Revolutionary War and we read the account of a soldier, did they fight in the whole war? Or did they fight in only part of the war? Maybe the first part, the last part, in the middle, right? Did they fight in the whole war or part of the war? Did they know all of what was happening? Or did they only know what they were told to do? Right? Did they know where they were going? Did they know where they were marching? Did they know where the battle took place? Or did they just know what they were told to do, their orders? Okay? This is like figuring out which witnesses saw the whole fight versus, right, when we're talking about the lunchroom fight now, this is like figuring out which witnesses saw the whole fight versus which witness only saw part of the lunchroom fight. Who saw the fight beginning to end versus who saw only the end of the fight. Who saw the fight clearly from up front, right? Did they know all of what's happening? Versus who saw the fight from the back of the crowd and couldn't really see all of what was happening. They didn't know all of what was going on, right? And the other problem here, sometimes people are honest about this, right? Sometimes people are like, oh yeah, I saw the whole thing. Sometimes, and that's the truth. Sometimes, okay, people pretend like they saw the whole thing, but didn't, right? So you have to figure out, what did they see? Are they telling the truth? How much of the truth are they telling? And, what did they really see? What did they really know that was going on? Or, what are they just pretending that they know? Okay. Getting back to the Revolutionary War, right? If we read the account of a leader during the Revolutionary War, are they giving, an account that is true, but that leaves out their mistakes, or are they telling the whole truth, their mistakes included? Are they going to blame others for the mistakes they made, or are they going to take responsibility for their mistakes? Okay. And This, when we compare it to the lunchroom fight, this is like hearing, when we ask the students who were fighting what happened, or when we ask their friends what happened. They'll tell the truth, but they probably are going to leave out the things that make them or their friends look bad, right? Like a leader leaving out their mistakes. Okay. Here's an example, one you might not expect. If adults, right, the principal, the dean, teachers, whoever, if they're monitoring the lunchroom and they're afraid they're going to get blamed for not preventing the fight, they might describe the fight in a different way to make it look like they didn't have a chance to stop the fight before it began. So we question in history, we question everyone and their account. Just because they're a leader, just because they're a person in charge, just because they're responsible, doesn't mean that they're always going to tell the whole truth. So we have to question everyone. All right. And getting back to the Revolutionary War, obviously it's a war, the Revolutionary War. There are two sides to a war. So if we read the account from a person on one side, are they going to be unbiased? Are they going to be fair to both sides, or are they going to make their side look good and the other side look bad? And we have to question that, right? Studying the Revolutionary War, if we're reading the account of an American, are they just going to make the United States look good and Great Britain look bad? If we read the account of a person from England, from Great Britain, are they going to do the opposite? Make Great Britain look good and the US look bad? All right. So this is, we call bias versus unbiased. Okay. In the lunchroom fight, this happens with the students who are fighting and their friends. Okay. But this also happens if one student is more popular than the other student. The other students are going to talk better about the popular student and worse about the unpopular student. If the adults think one student is a good kid who wouldn't start a fight, or think the other student is a troublemaker who fights all the time, they might see things in a certain way because of that. Remember, we talked about that a little before, earlier in the video. Right? This idea of bias, right? If you think one student's a good kid and one student's a troublemaker, then you're going to interpret the fight perhaps in a biased way, right? Not unbiased, not fair to both sides, because you think one kid or one student's a troublemaker and the other student's a good kid. Okay. But that leads us to another problem also. If one student really does start fights all the time, that's good evidence. That's good evidence to say, maybe they did start the fight this time because that's a pattern of behavior, right? That fits with what they have done in the past. But just because a student started fights in the past does not mean they started this fight. So you should consider past behavior. You should consider what happened in the past. But you have to hear from the witnesses to confirm what happened this time, and not just assume that the situation is the same as all the times in the past, right? So just because, a student acted a certain way in the past, or just because the United States has done certain things in the past, or just because some people have done some things in the past, doesn't mean they've done the same thing over again. But it's something you should consider, right? You should consider that when a person or a country or anything does a certain behavior over and over again, they're likely to do that behavior again. But, and again, this is what makes it so complicated, just because they have done it doesn't mean they are absolutely 100% going to do it again. And so it always, always, always comes down to doing the research, trying to figure out this time what happened. What witnesses do we have? What are they saying? And how much of what they are saying can we believe? Okay. So you don't have to write all of that down as your answers for questions 1, 2, and 3. if you copy down everything that I have on here verbatim, it's going to be a giant waste of your time, because I'm going to take points off because you just copied what I wrote. But hopefully this has helped you understand both the questions and why we're looking at and answering these questions, why we're studying a lunchroom fight that never happened in history class. And so to wrap up, feel free to watch video, go through the PowerPoint. Actually, you have to watch the video, so go through the PowerPoint. I'll be posting a quiz on the video shortly, and finish up the lunchroom fight part 1, and turn that in today. And then I'll be making another video going over lunchroom fight part 2, and posting that by the end of the week. Lunchroom fight part 2 is obviously due tomorrow, so keep a lookout for that and the quiz, and get your work done. Thanks for listening. Have a good rest of your day.